There was a time when the internet was a place you visited. You logged in. You logged out. It lived somewhere else. And then quietly, without permission, it stopped being a place at all. It became the background of everything. Work, memory, attention. The internet slipped into daily life so completely that we stopped noticing it. It shaped how we speak, how we remember, how we present ourselves. Post-internet art begins. After that moment, not when technology was new, but when it became invisible. This is not a story about screens or software. It's not about innovation. It's about what happens when an entire culture realizes it is being watched, recorded, measured, archived. Post-internet art is not made on the internet. It is made inside a world the internet has already rewritten. A world where identity is no longer stable, but editable. Profiles replace introductions. Metrics replace attention. Images circulate faster than memory can keep up. The self slowly becomes something that must be maintained, curated, filtered, optimized. Earlier art movements asked how to represent reality. Post-internet artists ask something colder. Who are we? When representation never ends. When every gesture might become content. When silence feels suspicious. Before post-internet art, there was digital art. Early digital artists were fascinated by machines. What could computers do? What could code create? There was optimism in that curiosity. A belief that technology would expand freedom. But post-internet artists were born into a different world. They did not meet technology as a promise. They met it as an atmosphere, something already present, already shaping behavior, already influencing how reality itself felt. The internet stopped asking permission. It entered bedrooms, classrooms, private thoughts. It blurred the line between public and private, between genuine expression and performance, between living and being seen living. This is the psychological shift at the center of post-internet art. Not alienation, but constant visibility. Not isolation, but exposure. Post-internet art does not celebrate this condition. It observes it closely, honestly. By the late 2000s, the internet was no longer surprising. It was expected. It sat quietly behind everyday gestures, shaping how people spoke, how they looked, how they imagined themselves. For a generation that grew up online, there was no separation, only continuity. This is the condition post-internet art responds to. Not novelty, but saturation. Not innovation, but exhaustion. the feeling of being surrounded by images, opinions, and versions of the self, all competing for attention. At the same time, earlier digital artists treated technology as a tool. Post-internet artists treat it as a climate, something you live inside, something that affects mood, behavior, desire, even when you are not consciously using it. Like humidity, like background noise. In this environment, identity becomes unstable, not because it disappears, but because it multiplies. Profiles, usernames, avatars, each one slightly different, each one optimized for visibility, each one performing a version of authenticity. Post-internet art does not ask, which version is real? It assumes they all are. And that assumption is unsettling. Because when identity is everywhere, it becomes difficult to feel grounded anywhere. This tension sits quietly beneath much of the work that defines the movement. One of the earliest artists to recognize this shift was Petra Cortright. Her work does not announce itself as critical. It does not shout. It appears casual, almost indifferent, which is precisely why it feels accurate. Cortright first became visible through simple webcam videos. A face, a room, a laptop camera. Digital effects drift across the screen. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no narrative payoff. And yet, the work holds attention because it mirrors everyday online presence. The gestures are small. A glance, a pause, a subtle movement. The filters do most of the work. They decorate. They distract. They obscure. The technology becomes a collaborator in the performance, neither neutral nor fully controlled. These videos feel intimate, but also strangely distant. They resemble communication, yet avoid conversation. This ambiguity reflects a larger internet condition. We are visible, but not necessarily known. Present, but rarely fully engaged. Connected, without closeness. Cortright's work reveals how easily personal space becomes public display. The bedroom becomes a stage. The camera becomes a mirror that never looks away. Post-internet art begins here, not with spectacle, but with the quiet realization that being seen has become unavoidable. By the time Petra Cortright began making webcam videos, the internet had already normalized exposure. Sharing your face was no longer remarkable. What mattered was how you appeared. Filtered, framed, adjusted. Presence itself had become a kind of labor. The webcam is a peculiar device. It suggests intimacy, but offers no guarantee of connection. You speak, but you don't hear a response. You perform, but the audience remains abstract. Cortright's work sits exactly in this uncertainty, where visibility replaces interaction. Her gestures are intentionally minimal. She does not explain herself. She does not attempt authenticity. Instead, she allows the technology to shape the encounter. Filters float across her face. Animations interrupt her presence. The software becomes as expressive as the person using it. This is not self-portraiture in the traditional sense. There is no attempt to reveal inner truth. What we see instead is a surface under constant modification, an identity that exists only as long as the connection holds. Temporary, irreplaceable, disposable. In post-internet art, identity is no longer something discovered. It is something managed, maintained through repetition, updated through interaction, measured through engagement. Cortright's work does not critique this directly. It simply accepts the rules and shows what happens next. What makes these videos unsettling is how familiar they feel. Nothing about them is extreme. They resemble the everyday performances millions of people repeat without thinking. The work doesn't exaggerate internet culture. It mirrors it, and that mirror is difficult to look away from. As her practice develops, the screen begins to feel insufficient. The internet does not disappear. It spills outward, into physical space, into objects, into materials that attempt to hold something inherently unstable. This transition marks a crucial moment. In post-internet art, Cortright's later works translate digital aesthetics into physical form. Paintings mounted on aluminum, surfaces layered with aggressive color, titles borrowed from file systems, and corrupted naming conventions. The works feel excessive, which is exactly how digital life feels. From the inside, these objects are not representations of the internet. They are byproducts of thinking within it. They carry the visual noise, the saturation, the instability of online environments. Meaning does not settle. The eye is constantly redirected. Attention fractures, then fractures again. In traditional painting, composition guides the viewer. In Cortright's work, composition overwhelms. The viewer does not contemplate. They navigate. This shift mirrors the way digital culture has transformed perception itself. We no longer look patiently. We scan. We skim. We move on. Post-internet art often appears playful. Bright colors, humor, absurd titles. But beneath the surface is a quieter tension. Constant visibility produces fatigue. The demand to perform never ends. Even withdrawal becomes a gesture that must be interpreted. This condition reshapes emotional life. Moments lose privacy. Experiences lose duration. Everything feels provisional. The present becomes content before it becomes memory. Post-internet artists do not mourn this loss. They document it calmly, without nostalgia, without outrage. In this world, objects no longer promise permanence. Images circulate freely. Detached from origin, authorship becomes ambiguous. Originals lose authority. What matters is visibility, not stability. Circulation replaces preservation. Presence replaces depth. The gallery itself begins to change. It becomes less a place of contemplation and more a node within a network. Works are photographed, shared, reposted, compressed. Their physical presence becomes secondary to their digital afterlife. Post-internet art anticipates this inevitability. But not all post-internet artists focus on visibility. Some turn their attention toward what remains after the performance fades, toward abandoned spaces, forgotten platforms, virtual environments left behind by shifting technologies. This is where John Raffman enters the story. If Cortright examines the surface of online identity, Raffman explores its aftermath. He treats the internet as a landscape of emotional residue, not progress, not innovation, but accumulation. Layers of desire, nostalgia, and loneliness left behind. Raffman's work often moves through virtual worlds and online archives, spaces designed for immersion that now feel strangely empty. Avatars wander without purpose. Environments persist long after their communities dissolve. The effect is melancholic, not because something was lost, but because it was temporary to begin with. These digital environments resemble ruins, not ancient, but recent. Their decay feels uncomfortable because it happens within our lifetime. Raffman does not treat these spaces ironically. He approaches them with patience, as if listening for traces of human presence embedded in code. In post-internet art, nostalgia operates differently. It is not longing for a distant past. It is longing for a version of the present that has already disappeared. Platforms evolve. Interfaces change. Experiences vanish without leaving physical evidence. Memory becomes fragmented, scattered across servers and archives. Raffman's work captures this instability. It does not criticize technology. It accepts impermanence as the condition. Online life is not meant to last. It is designed to refresh, to update, to overwrite itself continuously. Post-internet art does not resist this process. It slows down long enough to observe what remains. Taken together, post-internet art is not a style. It has no consistent aesthetic, no unified technique. What binds these works is a shared condition. They emerge from a world where life is continuously mediated, where reality is filtered before it is fully experienced. This art is not about screens. It is about attention, not about software, but about behaviors. Post-internet art observes how digital systems reshape perception, how they fragment focus, how they reward visibility, how they quietly reorganize desire. Without asking permission, perspective once organized space. The internet reorganizes attention. What we see is shaped by algorithms. What we remember is shaped by feeds. What we value is shaped by metrics. Post-internet art examines this structure. without nostalgia for what came before. This is why post-internet art often feels emotionally restrained. It does not dramatize. It does not moralize. It mirrors the flatness of digital experience itself. The exhaustion, the repetition, the quiet anxiety of always being reachable and never fully present. The works do not ask to be interpreted deeply. They ask to be recognized, to be felt as familiar, to trigger the sensation of already having seen something similar. Because repetition is the dominant rhythm of online life, originality becomes secondary to circulation. Post-internet art exists comfortably inside this contradiction. It is critical without protest, observational without distance. It does not reject technology. It accepts dependence as the starting point. This acceptance does not imply approval. It implies realism, a refusal to pretend. That disconnection is still possible. In this sense, post-internet art is deeply contemporary. It captures not the excitement of new technology, but the emotional residue left behind once novelty fades. The boredom, the restlessness, the subtle discomfort of existing in a world that never fully turns off. Every major art movement emerges from a change in how people see. The Renaissance organized space. Modernism shattered certainty. Post-internet art responds to a world where perception is networked, where attention is fragmented, where identity is no longer private, but shared, measured, and archived. This does not mean art has lost meaning. It means meaning now circulates differently. It moves faster. It decays quicker. It competes constantly. Post-internet art does not slow this process. It adapts to it. It compresses experience into forms that can survive circulation. The internet did not change art. It changed what it feels like to exist. Post-internet art simply refuses to look away from that fact. It captures the sensation of living inside systems that observe, record, and respond in real time. Systems that shape identity long before reflection begins. This art is not pessimistic. It is attentive. It notices what happens when life becomes data, when memory becomes searchable, when experience becomes content. Post-internet art does not offer escape routes. It offers recognition, a moment of clarity inside constant noise. In this recognition, there is a quiet honesty, a refusal to romanticize the past, a refusal to idealize the future. Only the present, filtered, networked, always updating. Post-internet art exists in that unstable space, not as a solution, but as a record. We may not notice it at first, because this art does not demand attention. It blends into the visual language we already inhabit, but that is its strength. Post-internet art does not interrupt experience. It reflects it, quietly, persistently, until recognition becomes unavoidable. The internet is no longer a tool. It is an environment. Post-internet art does not explain this shift. It assumes it. It works within it. It shows what happens when creativity adapts to permanent connectivity, when art no longer stands apart from daily life, but dissolves into it. In this dissolution, something important happens. Art stops pretending to be separate from systems of power, visibility, and attention. It becomes embedded, compromised, honest. Post-internet art does not claim purity. It claims accuracy. This accuracy is not comforting, but it is necessary, because the world it reflects is not slowing down. It is accelerating. Post-internet art captures a moment when culture realizes there is no return to an offline innocence, only adaptation. The internet did not create this condition. It revealed it. Post-internet art simply holds it still, long enough to be seen, not as spectacle, not as warning, but as a fact of contemporary life, one we are already living inside. Whether we acknowledge it or not, this is one chapter in a much larger story. On this channel, we trace how art evolves across cultures, movements, and moments of transformation. If you'd like to continue this journey, you can subscribe to Crossroads of Art. More episodes are already on the way.